Podcast Clips, episode 2.1.
And I love Tell All Mom, and I'd love to talk about it. And it was a big, in fact, and I say this with some humility, and was pleasantly surprised, but last time I checked, it was the #1 scientific paper on Earth. As far as reads since it was published. Wow. And that's across the Nature publishing platform. So it's approaching 500,000 reads.
Wow.
And that's not people reading articles about it. That's actually somebody going to the Nature website, clicking on a 125 page, which is a story in itself, detailed scientific paper, and taking a look at it. And that's hard in today's, impatient culture. Randall, I'm sorry, you were about to say something.
I was just going to suggest that you maybe go into a little bit of background on that and why you guys were there and in the paper and what that was all about.
Yeah. Dates back to 2013, and as some of your listeners know, there's a group we call the Comet Research Group, and that is a very informal, loosely organized, but frequently publishing group of 60 or 70 across the years, but usually somewhere between 15 to 30 on each paper, who have published since 2007. Beginning with the central thesis of the Comet Research Group is that there was a tremendous earth-shattering, climate-crashing cataclysm, as you all have well described in many, many hours of podcast 13,000 years ago, or as you all know, 12,882 years ago, sometime around June 30th. All right. And so the Comet Research Group had established itself by 2013, well in the newly founded canon of publishing on whether that event occurred or not. So we were already well into it, saying this event occurred, already into 2 or 3 papers, et cetera. We had 2 independent contacts, which is always good for serendipity purposes. One with Rob Hermes, who took a look at a piece of pottery, and he is from Los Alamos and part of the nuclear science teams and PhDs out there. And he identified the pottery and some of the rocks as having similarities with trinitite, right? Which is the glass remains from a nuclear explosion. So you got to have that kind of heat, minus the radiation, you can make trinitite just as it's made in a nuclear explosion if you have a airburst.
That was first testing of the first plutonium bomb at Alamogordo, New Mexico, the Trinity test. That's why it's trinitite.
That's exactly right. And that glass has a unique nature, and Hermes recognized it right away and did some testing and said that appears to have encountered the same conditions as a nuclear explosion. They were in touch, but then I heard independently from a gentleman named Philip Clapham, and he was writing a piece on it, and he reached out to me. He had a pretty good idea. He said, you guys, just thinking here, seem to have forensic skills, that the archaeologists aren't going to have. Now, this is me excluded. Remember me, I'm just the gadfly and ball boy for the credentialed scientists, but I get to go on all the trips and hang out on the bus, and I know all the stats, right? So he contacted Ball Boy and said, hey, would the team be interested in joining, the archaeological dig to some degree and taking a look at what they believe they have discovered a couple of meters down in their strata, which is a burn layer from 1700 BC, 3,700 years ago. And they've got some intriguing things, materials. But perhaps y'all, Philip was saying, could take a look at it and provide the right technical skills. That's a specific kind of technical skills. Those archaeologists don't use transmission electron microscopes or, materials probes and all
X-ray
of that.
spectroscopy.
I was, that's right. All of those acronyms. And those are special tools. And the Comet Research Group had those skills. So I ran it past Dr. West and Dr. Bunch, and then kind of the senior team got together amongst themselves, because these things can be time consuming. Little did they know, like anything like this, how time consuming it would be for them. But they got back to me and said, please reach out to them. So I reached out to Phil Sylvia, who had already spoken to Hermes, and the scientists at Los Alamos. So I contacted them, and on the Comet Research team's behalf said they are interested in this and they're willing to put some time in it. And they had considered it fairly carefully and looked over all their work to date and said this is something that we could do as a sidecar to the Younger Dryas event forensic research, but use those same tools. And let's go take a look at that soil. Let's take a look at that melted pottery. Let's look at the melted rocks, if you want to call them that. And let's see if they exhibit anything special from a geochemical or material standpoint. but it's a stunning place, Tel El Ammam. And just to give people a background on it, that Dr. Stephen Collins of Trinity Southwest University, who is a biblical archaeologist, and we could talk about that more, but let's not get wrapped up in the complications of all of that yet. But he's a man of faith, and he was already an established, somewhat younger archaeologist at the time, 20 years ago, 18, 20 years ago. And he was working in Israel at the time. I think he had some Jordanian experience, but he read Genesis, and he said, there's certain clues in here. There's certain geography of the story of Lot and Abraham and going to Sodom, which is what not the paper we published, but the archaeological team feels very confident it is. We, for very good reasons, it's not our lane, and it's not hard science. We're gonna, dodge the Sodom question best we could and just stuck to where it was there in Airburst. But he looked at the geographical clues in the Bible, and I recommend to anyone to Google Steve Collins and Trinity University and Tel El Ammam, and you can go see some of the talks he gives, because I can't, stuff difficult for me to summarize here. But the geographical clues led him to believe that it was on the east bank of the Jordan River. And we've all heard of the West Bank, and that's in Israel, and that's the Palestinian part of Israel, and where Jericho is, right? So Jericho is kind of the big city other than Jerusalem on the West Bank that's Palestinian run. And then it's Mira City on the other side of the Jordan Valley. So you've got Jericho, the Jordan River, 6 miles, then another 6 miles is Tel El Ammam. And both of them sit down in the valley, right? Which is a deep rift valley, very dramatic landscape in itself, right? That contains the Dead Sea. So you're 6 miles from Jericho, Jordan River, Tel El Ammam, and then about 8 miles to the Dead Sea to your south. So, Randall, you know a hell of a lot more about sacred geometry to me, but I have always felt there was a very sacred geometrical connection to where those cities were located, because then you add on, what were their roles? Well, they were the winter hangouts of the elites to some degree. Certainly the Jordanian side was, of the capital cities of Jerusalem and Amman. So up at the top of the hill, you got Jerusalem and Amman, where today not kings, but leaders still sit. And then they would come down and populate the valley. And the King Hussein still maintains a palace within, damn near earshot of Tel El Ammam. It's the hill against the thing. So the king has been coming down and living there for thousands of years.
Huh.
Okay. And there's a 4-way kind of connection between the two cities at the top. That said, Tel El Ammam was 10 times larger than Jericho and 20 times larger than Jerusalem when Tel El Ammam was at its height. So it was the largest city of Levant. And I do not think anyone disputes that. So back to Collins. So he said they're geographical clues that suggest it's north of the Dead Sea. And that's important, because this is where it gets into their other battle with Christian archaeology, if you will. For years, Christian archaeologists or Christian apologists and literalists and believers said Sodom was south of the Dead Sea. That was the Christian line, right? And I remember seeing that on the old Leonard Nimoy show back in the 70s, when he did a Where is Sodom? Hey, thank you for bringing that up, fellas. I appreciate it. Brad, you doing that?
That's Randall.
Is that Randall? Thank you, man. Yeah.
I thought it would be helpful.
Tel El Ammam. Yeah. And you see how Jericho is just directly equidistant, other side of the river. Okay. And see Amman up there. So that's up at the top of the hill. So you drop something like 1,500 feet just driving from Amman to Tel El Ammam. And the climate changes. It's just a different world. Same thing with Jerusalem. See where Jerusalem is? You drive from there.
I see.
Yeah. Right. And from Tel El Ammam, you can, and I've got a photo where you can see it. You can just barely see the glint of the gold of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which I thought was really cool. Okay. And go ahead and zoom into Tel El Ammam and maybe put on satellite. so I actually took a great video that's the most watched video of Collins giving his general lecture. And I don't want to try to summarize it too much, but there's a key word in there, a Hebrew word that describes it as that Sodom was in the Kakar, right? And the Kakar is, Collins will tell you, can be interpreted as the tortilla or the round plate, something round. It's the Kakar.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, Randall, if you'll zoom back out, the Kakar, and it also says in the Bible that the land, that hosted this location was well watered as in Egypt. Let's just take that one. Well watered as in Egypt. Zoom way out, Randall, if you will. If you're south of the Dead Sea, no one would describe that moonscape as well watered as in Egypt. It doesn't have anything to do with Egypt. No similarities between the Nile Delta. It's one of the most desolate wastelands on Earth. But then let's think about the Jordan River coming down into the Dead Sea. Sorry to bounce you around, but
That's
if you
all
zoom
right.
back out,
Not at all. I'm having
see
fun.
how the Jordan River had a delta too, and it is a river going into a body of water. And of course, it's been just completely abused. The rivers, the ecosystem is ruined, but there used to be a nice delta there. And that is all very, very green, lush. All those farm fields are some of the most productive in the Middle East. And originally that was all green. So that was the best place to live thousands of years ago. No one would have lived south of the Dead Sea, right? So Colin said, and again, you go back to, he's got a whole list of geographic clues. He said, I believe it's north of the Dead Sea, if I follow the Bible literally, and I believe it's on the east bank. And basically, he hadn't even been there in pursuit of it, but that's kind of his thesis. So he goes to the east bank, and he says, where are the cultural hills around here? Where are the oldest settlements? Where are the tells? They call them tells in Israel. And then when you move over to Jordan or the Middle East, they call them talls. So when you see Tal al-Hammam, you might think it's a misspelling because we always see the word tell for these cultural mounds, but they're interchangeable. Mm-hmm. And Tal al-Hammam, he found, I think, it depends on how you slice it up, but at least like 20 of them, right? Cultural mounds of varying size that are spread throughout the area that you have right there, just right there. That's perfect. There are 20 different places where people have stayed there so long that they actually built the earth up many feet. These aren't natural things. This is, and those are known all over the Middle East. And he kind of matrixed it all out, had to have one that was large enough and situated this or that. And the largest one there, which would match the description of the 5 cities of the plain. You had Sodom, Gomorrah, and I wouldn't attempt, I think I know a couple of, but the other 3 names, the cities of the plain. And but Sodom would have been the largest. He found what he believed to be the 5 big ones, and then took the largest and said that may be, that may be where that may have been the location of Sodom, this hill here. But no one had done any collecting on it. What an amazing thing! This huge, zoom on in, Randall. You can see this big thing. It looks like I don't know what you'd call that, but that whole hill, right, had never been collected on. It's set once or, one, it was kind of like a Göbekli Tepe story, where somebody had been out there once before, found a bunch of cultural stuff and said, well, it's all Byzantine, move on. And the problem was they couldn't adequately collect at it because the thing had a gun emplacement and was mined through most of the 20th century. So it was mined. There was no collecting there. Fortunately for Collins, they had just demined it. And I still find it a little strange. They don't give you any mine training when you're digging out there. It's like, we all know the Middle East. I mean, are you 100% certain you got every single mine out, folks? Because we're going to be walking around and digging out here. But for some reason, it's all cool now. But nobody had ever dug in it because it was a military camp. So by the time Collins get out there, and then they began what now is, I believe, 17 seasons, which is a lot of archaeology. Most archaeological expeditions do not extend to 17 seasons. That is a tremendous amount of work. And God bless those people. You talk a shoestring budget. This is not the German Archaeological Institute behind them. These folks are going over there and living on pita and shawarma, 2-star hotels, and toughen it out season after season after season. And very early on, they found that there was a burn layer about 2 meters down, and that there was absolute chaos in that layer, that it was just tumult of all types. And over the years, they kind of began to understand the tumult and how you could kind of see, well, this wall did this and this blew here, and here was where the heat came from. But that burn layer was still, you could still smell it. It smelled different than the dirt above it or below it. And it included, and also on the surface at other locations, certain pieces of pottery, for instance, that had been exposed to heat on one side so hot that they had actually, melted it, and also rocks that were melted that required extraordinarily high temperatures. That the YD team was great at, they had the skills to be able to determine that, and some of them up to 3,000 degrees C, and you're just not going to get that in a regular fire. And then they did the geochemistry, and it was enriched with things, including our favorite marker, platinum, right? Orders of magnitude more platinum in that layer than would be expected in crustal abundance. And long story short, so we came back. The second season was much more serious. I went over there as kind of tip of the spear. And then the next season in 2015 or 15, I went over there with Dr. Malcolm LeCompte and two other gentlemen from Clay and Tim Whitmer from North Carolina. And both of them, one a medical doctor and the other a PhD archaeologist. And Clay had actually discovered Site X, which is the location of the lost colony. So that was pretty neat to go over there with him. And we went over there as a team the second time, did some collecting, and then Malcolm came back one more time. And then they started writing the paper, or we did. And, that's kind of 80-20 rule, with a couple of people do 80% and everybody else on the paper does 20 and tosses in what they can and whatnot. And I'd actually, done enough collecting so that I was definitely going to be a part of it. But we must have passed around, 20 different versions of it. And it took 5 years to write, major versions, just that would come by me because I wasn't a principal writer. And it took 5 years to write. And I think one of the things, which is totally understandable, that was missed in the press coverage, which was pretty damn extraordinary for the paper. It was in hundreds of publications around the world. But one of the things they missed, and I understand this paper was 125 pages long. The Atacama paper we'll discuss in a little while by Pete Schultz, who's a wonderful scientist and I wouldn't say didn't miss a thing, but he did an adequate job and published in a major journal, and nobody would say it was a deficient paper on Atacama Desert glass. I mean, just a few weeks ago, and we'll talk about that later. But hell, it was only 6 pages long. And not that pages, just like any kind of thing you've written, pages aren't necessarily a substitute for competency, but in this case, it really says something. I mean, they literally did not leave a stone unturned. There is an incredible amount of information in that paper. And then people come out and trash it on Twitter, and treat it like it was, some, dashed off screed by maniacs who were over there looting, and misrepresenting archaeology. And there was actually accusations of that. And I kind of jumped there right into the ugly part, because if you get a lot of attention in anything, you're going to have naysayers.
But some of those
naysayers came up before.
Some of those people on Twitter that were trashing it do think that the Comet Research Group are maniacs. Like they have always treated them that way because they don't like the hypothesis, right?
That's right. And it was, there are many players in it, and it's internet stuff, so there's never any defined coalition. And you could say they're trying to prove their book. Fair enough. And that'll always be a knock on biblical archaeology. But then you say, well, what methods do they use? Mm-hmm. What working knowledge do they have? What experience do they have? And my God, here's a book. Let's tell a mom, I forget what you call them, dig book, where they go and record everything.
You talked about the finding of impact proxies, and so you had a team with technical capabilities who went over there, and it's irrelevant what the people's beliefs were, aside from the fact that the cultural layers there and the impact proxies are there. Now, what does that mean? That's open to wide open discussion, whether or not it's Sodom and Gomorrah, the biblical, apparently there was an airburst, regardless of what your prior beliefs happened to be.
That's right, Randall.
There is evidence of an airburst there.
Right. There is evidence of an airburst, exactly, and the evidence should be refuted, not the messengers.
Yeah, see, I didn't really know any of the details of the story, but that's essentially what I'm hearing is that, so he avoided actually addressing the evidence itself.
That completely. And
completely. Interesting.
Yeah, and remember, of course, I'm no child of the book. I'm kind of a Christian and Easter Episcopalian. Sometimes I even do a little ushering. But I am I am not a biblical literalist. As far as I know, no one else in the Comet Research Group is, right? But we went over there with an open mind, the same way Boslow should have treated it. And I half expected, though, this is going to be complete bullshit. These people are coming in trying to prove the book, and God bless them, but they might be, so biased that I'm going to see things that are going to, make me question their credibility. But remember, they invited in non-faithful scientists to look over their shoulder and provide additional tools to see what could be found. And I don't think anybody, if it had come back, that there wasn't 1,000 times as much platinum in that layer as there is in the crust of the earth, if it had come back the same, I don't think anybody had been crestfallen and felt like we'd let God down or anything. On our team, it was, we'll take the cards as they come. And I think I don't really know how to describe the attitude that came at us from the Boslow types. And of course, it's a bare minimum of people. I'm sure we had more people cheering us on than were attacking us.
The number of reads of the article will show you that.
Yeah, there you go. But I call it's anti-Christian bigotry. He's a bigot.
Yeah,
that's what you call somebody like that in the old days, at least.
Right.
And it's bigoted and it's prejudice that our data can't be real because we are other.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So what is the data?
Ultimately? Yeah. What were the conclusions ultimately did they come to from the paper? Sorry,
oh my God. Well, when you find melted, when you find melted glass on bone, right, and you find phytoliths.
Let's talk about these details.
Yeah, that's what we're asking for.
Oh God, guys, don't torture me. Remember, I'm the ball boy. I can't describe the playbook, but so well.
Well, Randall,
No, it's the general sweep. The
description for the audience.
Yeah, but they can go and take a look at that paper and go take a look at those bones that have melted green glass on them, and then other bits of glass where you have imprinted in them plants. Right? Because if you heat something up, believe it or not, the vaporization of these materials, and not just vaporization, but the melting of them, and then the requenching of them. If that requenching includes a piece of vegetative material, even though that thing must have gotten hot and disappeared quick, it still leaves an impression, right, within the molten material. So you got phytoliths, you've got molten glass on people, you've got elevated abundance of rare earth materials that you find in cosmic materials. You've got the physical destruction of the city. You've got the change in the nature of the strata. There's a lot going on in the Telamon paper. That's why it took 125 pages.
Yeah, just to stress that there is physical evidence that's very convincing, and for Boslow to attack their beliefs or their meager funds to do it's for him to sink to these levels. I don't know if he's retired, but to ignore these obvious facts and start out with those kind of attacks is just it's
cruel attacks. Those kind of attacks are cruel.
Scientists are going, yeah, totally. and I tell people all the time, one of the really important things that Randall's brought across with all the podcasts that we've done is to show or tell the repeated stories that these early scientists, the uniformitarians, were really against any evidence that made it look like there was a great flood, because that sounded like some biblical story, and we're not going in that direction. So they avoided this whole suite of evidence that seemed obvious because that's a Bible story. Not even going there. And it totally derailed a century or more of research that we could have been figuring these things out, because there was some, bias or mindset that said, nope, biblical. We're not going there.
That's right. And remember, and I don't know I've got some feeling for it, but I know that they're comfortable with the justification that I guess there are some Christian literalists that would say it was truly a unique event from the hand of God that has no material explanations to it. And he just threw that godly thunderbolt down. And that's probably what they thought Sodom was for years. These folks, faithful though they are, were looking to see if there was a material explanation for what happened. If there is a purely material explanation, they're fine with that because they believe that certain material occurrences in the human experience have a divine nature in some sort, right? But they weren't looking for the thunderbolt from God. They were just trying to see how hot was the thunderbolt. Was it really hot enough to be one of these airbursts? You know, they didn't know anything about these things when they came along. Collins had a pretty good podcast, or they're doing a YouTube, and I recommend people that called Troweling Down, you know? Quiche or trowels. Yeah, troweling down. Yeah. And him and Dr. Gary.
You just have a trowel sitting there on your desk.
Oh yeah.
It's like he's
sure I do.
Sure
I do, Russ. I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't? Yeah. I mean, now I might be the only person with that in a 3 million-year-old piece of turtle shit.
Oh yeah, you got a copper lighter.
We got a drill head here for
drill head, nice drill head.
One of those for sure.
Yeah.
Randall's a mason. Show him what a trowel is.
Got a mini Tusk?
Hey,
that's the mini Tusk. Yeah. But yeah, so it's a complex thing, and it involves all sorts of. That's what's so fascinating about it. Obviously frustrating. Yeah, nice, bro. It's fascinating and then frustrating, but it involves science and sociology and religion and geography. You know, it's one of these just multifaceted stories that even if you weren't prepared to accept it, I recommend anyone with scientific interest to go and dig in a little bit on it. You know, even if you don't love it all, there's just a lot there. It's a rich story, and you know, there's probably more to come.
Can I share the photograph of the comparison between the Pallas material you found and the trinitite?
Sure, please do.
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay, let's take a look at it here.
And we should also talk about the other melt glass that was down in South America too,
and why Mark Boslow supported that. The 6-page paper over the 125-page paper.
Interesting there. Okay, so here you go.
Yeah.
I particularly like this specimen here. But all of them. Look at that. Look at the spherals.
What are we in 51? I believe that was might have been some of the collection I did. The thing in the upper right.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's see. A and B are
no. I found something larger. Excuse me. I take that back. That's 20 millimeters. I found some bigger stuff than that. That's elsewhere in the paper. Okay. But yeah, so just A and B narrate that for us. Yeah. Scattered
electron microscopic images compare a melted decorated zircon embedded in mud brick melt glass. So here's your zircon. And look, here's from the Pallas deposits, and here's from Trinity. B, let's see what's B. Same thing. C and D are photomicrographs, compare a melted potsherd from the Pallas with similar looking material from Trinity. Yeah, look at this.
Oh.
I mean, they're almost interchangeable.
Yeah.
They really are. And it takes pottery? A lot of work to do that.
That's pottery that melted.
Yes.
So, yeah. Wow. What does it take to melt clay?
That's like identical.
Yeah, you see, the melted zircons in panels A and B were found in highly vesicular glass, like these from the Pallas and the Trinity site, respectively. And G and H are scanning electron microscope images of a spheral fused onto mud brick melt glass from the Pallas and a spheral embedded into trinitite from the Trinity atomic test. Now, how can you ignore evidence like this?
Well, let's talk about what they paid attention to for a second. I'm sure y'all caught to some degree that where they attacked the paper, they ignored the geochemistry, the material science, right, and the suite of evidence, and they zeroed in on the fact that some of the photos had insignificant kind of ancillary things removed for clarity from the photo, right? Like they would, and I don't think it was entirely deliberate. I think that one of the authors, I know he did, downloaded, just had an assistant that does some of his graphic work, lieutenant working on his stuff that's probably ignorant to some of the standards of archaeology. And that person took out some of the directional arrows that you'll see, and like a tool and stuff. And it was literally all insignificant. Nothing was moved around or anything like that. And they went after that like just a pack of dogs, but no one yet has said a word about the evidence other than coming after the presentation of it. And
so, yeah. Red herrings.
That's right.
We're beginning to see the typical pattern of critical fallacies here, logical fallacies.
That's right.
Well, like I said, there were people I just hate to say the word again, but on Twitter that were PhDs and stuff accusing us, saying that we were over there trying to raise the profile of the site so that we could hawk potsherds back in the U.S. so we could bring material home. So yeah, I'll tell you, if anybody wants to send me $5,000 for this piece of Tell All Mom, you got it. And it has been a successful fraud. And it'll help pay for that trip I went on 6 years ago in order to boost my potsherd inventory and improve its reputation. Well, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Nobody's doing that. These people are so careful and they're so amazing. First of all, this isn't even, this was 1,700 years after the cataclysm, after the airburst, this around the time of Jesus. And this stuff, dime a dozen. I mean, it's laying everywhere. You probably saw a little bit of that in Egypt, but it's amazing. There are whole piles of it. And you can take as much of this stuff home as you want. Even the people at customs, it's okay because there's so much of it. But what I was going to say about these guys, they are so skilled. The archaeologists at Trinity Southwest, the Cobbs and Gary Byers and Dr. Collins, they can pick up a piece of pottery out there and 98% of the pieces immediately put it within about 100 to 200 year range over anywhere back 6,000 years.
Just by style?
Just by style. And, they don't do a lot of C14 testing over there.
Yeah.
And that's true across Middle Eastern archaeology. They do it with the artifacts, right? Because they know the artifact evolution so well that it's a lot cheaper to go, well, we know this layer's Iron Age because it's that look, this curves exactly that way and this does that. So they do their dating, as again, a lot of sites do, just based off of what period it was. And they have these collection days. Obviously, the dig is out there bringing the stuff in. And then when you have a day off, say for weather, it actually snowed like hell one time we were there, which was really, really cool to see Amman covered in 5 inches of snow. And so you'll take a day off, and what they do then, they don't go back and sleep. They all gather in a room and take all the sherds and start sorting them and dating them and characterizing them, right? And attributing them to ages. And it's just incredible to think of the field knowledge and experience it takes when you see them pick up one piece and they describe it with some very technical term attributed to an age, attributed to a style, maybe the motif, all of that stuff. And they know it. You've got to know a lot to do that, and that doesn't come from being faithful. You don't get that out of the Bible. You have to be a real archaeologist to date that stuff. And it's just impressive as hell. And that makes it all the more frustrating when people come after them and make them less than scientists.